Hey guys, it's Mike here, and I just saw Black Widow, the newest MCU movie out now in theaters. Remember those things? Starring Scarlett Johansson as the titular Black Widow, who's finally getting her own standalone film. Unfortunately, now that her character is no longer alive. Good going, Marvel. Now, going into this movie, I wasn't particularly hyped for it. The trailers looked decent enough for the most part, like a super spy James Bond movie meets the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it even had some actors in it that I liked, such as David Harbour from Stranger Things and also Casino Royale, playing again into the James Bond influences. But with that being said, it felt to me and many other fans in the Marvel audience that this was ultimately too little too late, in a film that really should have come out multiple phases ago, or at the very least before Avengers Endgame, when Black Widow met her unfortunate end. No, not that one. And now upon braving the trip to the movie theater and risking my very life to bring you this review, I'd have to say that overall the movie was meh. Yeah, I mean, that's about what I expected, and probably what you did too. But now, let's get into the plot, and there will be some spoilers, as little as they mean in a film like this. So if you care, then come back after you've seen the movie. Otherwise, let's get into this review. Now, the story begins with young Natasha and her family of her sister Yelena, her mother Melina, and her father Alexei, otherwise known as the Red Guardian, all of them living together in America. However, it's revealed that they're secretly sleeper cell agents, working for the evil Russian leader Dreykov, played by Ray Winston. The leader of the Red Room were the Black Widows, female super spies who use their feminine talents to undergo missions, are trained. After Natasha and her family escape from S.H.I.E.L.D. and then ultimately break up, we cut forward multiple decades, and skip a lot of important backstory in the process, to get to the period of time where this takes place, which is right after Captain America's Civil War. As a result, Black Widow is on the run from the world's governments, and has to get to safety, as Thunderbolt Ross is close to tracking her down. Well, not really, as they reveal that she's halfway around the world, when he thinks that she's firmly in her grasp. Meanwhile, Natasha's sister Yelena tracks down a rogue widow, and is exposed to a gas that breaks her programming, revealing that she and the other widows were under chemical control the entire time. With this revelation firmly in her mind, Yelena goes on the run from the Red Room, and is tracked down by Natasha, who believed that she had killed Dreykov in a mission that resulted in the assumed death of his daughter. Together, the two of them avoid the other widows and the Taskmaster, the ultimate assassin sent by the Red Room, who has the ability to copy any fighting style or physicality that they see, all while rescuing their father from prison and reuniting with their mother. But together, can they hope to bring down Dreykov and stop their pursuers? And will Black Widow die? Well, obviously not, since she already died in Avengers Endgame. Well, this is awkward. So overall, this movie is a mixed bag. There were some things I liked about it, but a lot of them that I definitely didn't. As a result, I left the movie feeling about exactly how I expected going in. Now, some things were actually a little bit better, but some of them were a lot worse. So let's get into those right now, beginning with what I liked about this movie. Starting, of course, with the performances and the character dynamics. Of course, we have ScarJo returning to play Black Widow. I would say that she gives a pretty decent performance in this role, as she has in most of the MCU up until now. I never really thought that she was one of the strongest members of the Avengers, and sometimes kind of felt like she stuck out as simply being the human without powers or the token female character. But I think that with the right script and story, she definitely can carry a film. Although I'll get into whether or not this movie had either of those as I go on. The same could be said for Florence Pugh, who played her sister Yelena, who had the sisterly dynamic with ScarJo, as well as Rachel Weisz, who played their mother, Melina, and best of all, who was probably my favorite character of the entire film, would be David Harbour, as the Red Guardian, who not only gave the best performance of the bunch, but also had a lot of charisma, and was really funny throughout, despite the fact that the film seemed to go out of its way to constantly make him the butt of every joke, and seem kind of idiotic or incompetent compared to the other characters. However, despite these actors trying to give their best performances, one of the things I will have to say is that all of them, unfortunately, were doing this fake Russian accent pretty much the entire time, which really took me out of a lot of the performances, especially Florence Pugh's, because she was given a lot of dialogue, which definitely doesn't help that much of the dialogue in this movie wasn't very well written, and you could tell that she's bringing emotion to the performance, but every line that she reads is in this clearly phony Russian accent, and they don't even have Scarlett Johansson do the accent during the film, so it raises the question of why they didn't simply have everyone do the American accent, which we see at the start of the film all of them are capable of of doing. And additionally, as you would expect in a movie like this, there were a number of action sequences throughout this film, some of them which were actually fun, but most of them unfortunately were pretty nonsensical and had so many insane moments that completely shattered my verisimilitude. Now of course we know that Scarlett Johansson can't die here because obviously she already did in Avengers Endgame, which is something that really robs the film of most of its tension, but that doesn't mean that they need to have her survive like 10 exploding car crashes or falling from near orbit with a parachute only opening about 2 feet from the ground and barely taking any damage at all. And there are so many scenes like that. It's like I'm watching one of the most recent Fast and Furious movies, and so many people give those movies and that franchise crap, but I saw just as many unrealistic and ridiculous scenes here that I don't see how anyone can't call this movie out for being exactly as ridiculous and unrealistic. It's like they forgot they weren't writing a character with superpowers at various points. Even early in the film, she does a bunch of unrealistic things as a child, when she's able to keep disarming trained soldiers who are twice her size. Now, of course, Black Widow has always done some things that stretch suspension of disbelief, like in Avengers, how she was jumping on the different Chitauri ships and attacking them, and doing things that someone without superpowers would never be able to do, but it stretched it so far here that the rubber band just completely broke. And also during the action sequences, and additionally during the rest of the film, I felt like the direction and cinematography were pretty weak for the most part. Now there definitely were some decent shots and scenes throughout the way, like the whole thing with the prison escape, but there was far too much shaky cam during the fight scenes and way too many close-up shots throughout. They need to pull that camera back, choreograph the fight scenes more in depth so you don't have to cut so much. And honestly, they should probably just hire the guys who choreographed The Raid and John Wick. I mean, just imagine how awesome this movie would have been if the action was even as half as good as John Wick 1, 2, or 3, which ultimately it doesn't end up being. I will say though that the music was really good for the most part, bringing some intensity and epic feeling to a number of the moments throughout. However, there were some very obvious and kind of pointless musical cues at points that I felt were a little distracting. Like a character just puts something into a car and we get dramatic music, or doing something rather mundane. And additionally, there's a really bad cover of Smells Like Teen Spirit at the start of the film that reminded me a lot of the Pitbull cover of The Rains Down in Africa from Aquaman that everyone hated. So I wonder how many people are going to talk about that. There were also some decent Easter eggs along the way, such as Thunderbolt Ross, who played a part early on but was really barely in the movie. There were some references to Captain America fighting the Red Guardian, which of course we saw in the comics but never in the movies. It makes you question whether or not they were actually referencing Captain America from the end of Endgame when he goes back in time, even though it doesn't make any sense for him to have gone back in time to the same timeline because it contradicts all of time travel that was established in that very movie. And we even get a cameo from a character they introduced in Falcon the Winter Soldier at the end of the film, which I'll get into soon. But with that being said, as far as the negatives go, I've already talked about the fact that the film is lacking tension, that there's those bad Russian accents and weak dialogue, and the direction and cinematography leaves much to be desired. I also thought the villains here were pretty weak, with again Thunderbolt Ross barely being in it, and the main villain of Dreykov feeling like a undercooked Bond villain who was in the movie about as much as Blofeld was in Spectre, and was very similar to him in a number of ways, controlling an advanced network of women in power all around the world, who used to control everything from a distance. And without going too far into it, the way that Black Widow was actually able to defeat the villain in the end is actually one of the dumbest moments in the entire MCU, which involves her slamming her own head onto a desk, and it's really as dumb, if not dumber, than it sounds. How did this script get greenlit again? I also wasn't really a fan of the whole subplot involving the characters from the Red Room being brainwashed using some kind of mystery chemical that made it to where they did things beyond their control, rather than simply being brainwashed and doing things because they were taught to do them and conditioned in other ways, which could lead to more internal turmoil. Of course, they did have a scene where Francis Pugh's character does say, "Oh, I didn't know for sure when it was really me or when it was the chemical that wanted to do these things," but nonetheless, it still feels like a kind of hand-wavy way that Disney is trying to write off the fact that these trained assassins actually go out and do things of their own volition, and tries to make them seem less morally gray as a result, including, of course, our main character. Additionally, Taskmaster, who seemed really cool at first, was ultimately really disappointing and kind of ruined when you compare it to the comic book version. Not only being dumbed down to where instead of it being a guy who has a superpower in which he could see someone doing something and then replicate it exactly, for better or for worse, which was also his weakness. But in this case, it's basically some sci-fi robotics where you can literally look at his eyes in the mask and see it doing calculations and a heads-up display and all this stuff that really just made it feel like a mediocre adaptation. And come the very end, when they do the big twist reveal and show off exactly who it is, it honestly reminded me a lot of the Deadpool scene from X-Men Origins Wolverine in terms of just how bad it was. So that goes to show you just how much they basically ruined Taskmaster as a really cool character from the comics that I was actually looking forward to seeing here. And I don't really have any interest in seeing it again after this film. And also, for a movie about Black Widow, a character who in the comics uses her looks and sex to get what she wants and accomplish her missions, this probably would have been a lot better off if it actually had an R rating and some more sexuality. But of course, that would never happen in this day and age, especially after ScarJo's comments about not liking how she was used for sex appeal in Iron Man 2, despite being in way more graphic films like Under the Skin, where she does full frontal and sex scenes, or really half the movies that she did from her early career. Even in this one, there's still gratuitous panning shots of her ass, in the very film that she produced. Nope, nothing hypocritical about that, not at all. It's just a shame that I didn't direct it. I would have had the film revolve around Black Widow seducing a nerdy YouTuber who likes to talk about movies, complete with copious amounts of nudity and sex scenes. Naturally, I would play the role for the sake of authenticity. I'm a method actor too, by the way. But by the time the film is over, we get to our first and only credits scene of the film, which further bridges the gap between the Disney Plus series and the movies, by having a scene involving Yelena visiting Natasha's grave and being approached by Lady Hydra, who is introduced in Falcon the Winter Soldier, played of course by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who played Elaine in Seinfeld, and is another actress in this, much like Rachel Weisz, who has barely aged over the past several decades. Maybe they actually found that fountain of youth after all. That would also explain Hugh Jackman. And apparently Yelena works for her now, along with US Agent, who was recruited at the end of Falcon the Winter Soldier. So it seems like maybe Hydra is rebuilding itself after the events of Captain America and the Winter Soldier, and perhaps they're going to be one of the big bad villain organizations moving forward. But Lady Hydra told Yelena that Hawkeye was the one responsible for killing Natasha, which seems like it's setting up for the two of them to fight, only on Disney Plus. Make sure to subscribe to see more, or maybe just sail the high seas. Yar! So overall, Black Widow was an okay MCU movie that has some solid performances and entertaining moments, but also a lot of nonsensical moments that make the Fast and Furious franchise blush.
You don't turn your back on family.
Ultimately, the biggest problem is what everyone suspected, that this movie came out at the wrong time and involved a character that audiences have mostly moved on from by the time that she finally got a film. If this had come out instead of Captain Marvel, or when the film itself was set, then it would have meant a lot more. Even then, if Marvel was going to give us this film, they could have done a lot better. Instead, we get one of the weaker entries in the MCU. Not the worst, but far from the best. And yet another sign that the MCU is unfortunately on the decline, and really has been ever since Infinity War. Hopefully they'll be able to right the ship with movies like Spider-Man No Way Home, and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, because I can tell you, when it comes to all the other stuff coming out, I'm not exactly excited. So what did you think of Black Widow? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to subscribe and enable all notifications, so you can stay up to date with all of my videos. Thanks for watching, and make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.